Hi, everyone, and thank you so much for joining me today. My name is Precious, and I am joined by the incredible Alee Quick of the News Literacy Project. The News Literacy Project, a nonpartisan education nonprofit, is building a national movement to advance the practice of news literacy throughout American society, creating better informed, more engaged, and more empowered individuals, and ultimately a stronger democracy. Alee Quick joined NLP as Civic Marketing Manager in July 2022. She previously oversaw marketing and public relations for the Paul Simon Public Policy Institute, a nonpartisan think tank named for and founded by the late senator from Illinois. Before that, she was the editor of the Southern Illinoisan newspaper in Carbondale, Illinois, where she worked in the newsroom for more than 6 years. She was also a fundraiser for USA Rugby and led marketing and communications in M River Inc., which builds river models for schools, museums, and labs. She has 2 bachelor's degrees from the University of Missouri, one in journalism and one in Spanish. Thank you so much for being on. How are you today?
Fine. Thank you so much for having me.
So I'm doing great. It's a Friday, and I'm super excited to talk to you because I absolutely love news. But I know that I'm not the only one who loves news, and there's also many people who don't. So how is the absence of news literacy hurting individuals and whole communities?
So we at the News Literacy Project think that empowering people with news literacy education is more the way to think about it rather than focusing on the harm. We want to talk about what we see as a way to move forward together. We saw, over the past few years, especially kind of culminating on January 6th, that we're having a hard time kind of agreeing on facts. We don't think that facts should be partisan. And we see a lot of mis and disinformation coming from all kinds of information providers above a partisan bent. But a lot of people came to this mission after January 6th, and with a lot of people talking about whether or not the election system was trustworthy, and kind of looking at some of that information. So we think that people are more empowered to make good decisions when they have the information to understand the kind of information that they are reading and consuming. Yeah. So when you look at the newspaper, there are different kinds of information in a newspaper, right? There's the news, but there's also opinion, and there's also advertisements that might be in the newspaper. So part of what we want to do is help people understand the difference among these different types of information. Of course, with the internet, things get a little more complicated as well, because we have misinformation and disinformation that easily spread online because anybody can spread information online, right?
Yeah.
So what we see are there are bad actors who might be spreading disinformation that has, the intention of misleading people. And then, but we also see people who kind of can't, there are red flags that we know to watch out for when it comes to misinformation, disinformation. That's part of what we're trying to teach people. Is how do you know that something is reliable, especially online? Because we see a lot of people who are sharing misinformation with the best intentions at heart. I'm thinking about stuff like urban legends. One thing I saw really recently is this goes around Facebook a lot. Every couple of years, it'll be it's a statement that's I do not give Facebook permission to share my photos. Share this before tomorrow, because tomorrow the Facebook rules are changing. And this is a really common hoax, essentially, that circulates on Facebook all the time. And people share this because they're oh, I want to help people understand that, they think they're doing the right thing by sharing this, but it's really a hoax and it doesn't mean anything and it's completely false. They're posting on Facebook, hey, I don't give Facebook permission to share my photos, really doesn't do anything.
Yeah.
So we want to help people understand that too. There's the bad actors, but then there's also just people who might be confused about information they see and, aren't sure who to trust. And so what we do in our education is we try to help people kind of teach people how to think about news and information rather than what to think about news and information. And we also try to avoid people becoming cynical about the news. Sometimes it can be really overwhelming to like face all this misinformation, to feel confused about the information that we're seeing. That can feel really overwhelming, and it's easy to become cynical and just kind of throw your hands up and go like, there's nothing I can do about it. But part of what we want to do is help people learn, like, there are little things that you can do. You can help, these are some tips to like Google things and check and fact check for yourself. So those are a lot of that's kind of that's what we're doing. Yeah.
I love that. And I also love that you're not focusing on necessarily the absence or just the harmful ways of the absence of news literacy, but just so many great things that the News Literacy Project is doing. But personally, I see that you have done so much in your career and had a very successful career so far. So what led you to want to join the News Literacy Project?
That's nice of you to say. So I got a degree in journalism, and then I worked in both marketing and journalism, as you laid out in your introduction, which was very thorough. Thank you. And I will say, when I was working at the newspaper, I live in a rural area. I live in Illinois, in Southern Illinois. And so when I was working at the newspaper here, we were serving a rural audience. And I think that in rural areas, especially, we see something called news deserts, right? Which is where there used to be a lot more newspapers and places to get reliable, nonpartisan information. And just through like market trends and people changing their preferences for, the internet, TV news, like there's a lot of different competing sources of information. And that has kind of devalued newspapers in some ways. So we see especially that newspapers are really suffering in rural areas. And that's not to say that you can't get good information from the radio and TV and the internet, because you absolutely can. It's just, one less, without a newspaper, that's one less way to get the news in your local community. So I noticed that a lot when I was a newspaper editor. And I also noticed how, especially kind of what I was talking about earlier with the people who may be a little bit confused about the information that they're seeing. I noticed that a lot when I was at the paper. So in the summer of 2020, there were a lot of protests after the death of George Floyd. Also, that was during the height of the pandemic. So I think, these things happening at the same time, and just really tensions were really high in the country. Yes. And we had demonstrations here, even though I do live in a rural area. I live in a college town, and there were a lot of Black Lives Matter demonstrations that were kind of cropping up here in my rural community. And I got a call at the newspaper one day from this woman who was really concerned about coming to Carbondale to do her grocery shopping. That's the town where I live. It's called Carbondale. She was really nervous about coming to town to do her grocery shopping because she had read online that Antifa was busing violent protesters into town, right? And so this is it was a really common kind of internet hoax that went around that time. And so so she had called the paper to ask, if that was true. And I don't know, it just really spoke to me about, I was glad that she had called the paper, and we were able to have a really nice conversation. And I explained to her, like, that the people who work at the paper are her neighbors, and they've been at the protests. Like, they're definitely people you can trust, and they haven't seen anything like that. There's been no violence, no buses, like, it's okay. You're totally safe to come into town and do your shopping. And it just made me think, like, we really need a way, especially for people like that, to like, who are really curious and just want good information. We need a way to help them get that information that they want and need. Like, they want to understand what's going on in these local communities and understand how it might affect them or not. And, she was kind of seeing this misinformation on the internet, and it really scared her. And I don't know, that made me want to work to help people, understand how to spot disinformation, how to verify claims for themselves, and how to like move forward in a constructive and empowered way.
That is great. I definitely agree with you. I feel like 2020 was just such a big time with news. There was so many tensions, and I feel like a lot of that was because of social media and entertainment. So how can people approach social media and entertainment, like TV, movies, and so on, with news literacy, specifically children and teens?
Mm-hmm. So I think a really big thing is kind of knowing what to watch out for. Like we were talking, like I said earlier, I use that newspaper as an example where you might see all different kinds of information in one newspaper. Well, social media is absolutely the same way. When you are scrolling through your feed, you might get a recipe, you might get some piece of advice that's totally legit. You'll see your friend's feelings, but then you may also see like a screenshot of a tweet. So how do we know that that is actually a tweet that someone said? It's really easy to change these things. So it's just kind of knowing red flags is a lot of what I've been thinking about lately. On social media, especially, is recognizing, some posts might be sponsored. And if they are sponsored, how do we find out who paid for that? And how does that change how we might think about that information? Again, like I said, if we see a screenshot, we may take that at face value, but how do we know that it's legitimate? Do we have a source for the original context? So these are things that we want people to understand, is kind of how to recognize different types of information that are coming across their feed. And, we've talked a lot about misinformation and disinformation, but I think part of what we do too that's really important is knowing that there is information that you can trust and feeling empowered to understand, like, okay, I think this is a credible source because it, meets this criteria that I've learned through news literacy for, having journalistic standards or reliable source of information. So it's not all bad, it's not all avoiding misinformation. It's also, hey, we need information. Where can we get the good stuff?
Yes. Yes. And in terms of entertainment and like I said, TV and movies, but specifically with performers, what role do actors and singers and social media personalities, TV hosts and all play in the news? And how can their viewers really credit the reliability of their sources?
Yeah, I think we just always have to remember who's telling us this information, how do they know it, and why are they telling me this information? Entertainers are people and they make mistakes, but they also probably have some really good information and life experiences that are worth learning from, right? So for me, it's kind of all about just understanding, or for us, for the News Literacy Project, it's about understanding, again, who's giving you the information, why and how, and helping that kind of inform you. And when I think about entertainers as well, especially when it comes to information, there's two big things. There are social media influencers, which you brought up, who may be, recommending a product, right?
Yeah.
So I think with that, it's especially important to know how to understand various social media platforms, because they all have different policies for how you can promote information and get paid to promote something on social media. And there's also different ways that posts are flagged, right? So we might see a hashtag that says #ad, or we might see a little thing that says sponsored, right? So that's a big part of news literacy education, is understanding what that means when you see it in a feed. So when somebody who is probably an influencer, who is probably trying to sell you something because they're essentially getting paid to advertise on behalf of a brand, how to recognize that. And the platforms do kind of have that built in, that ability to see, hey, this is an ad, but it's different on every platform, of course. So it's all about just like understanding that. I think that's a big thing. The other thing that we talk about a lot in news literacy is like satire and entertainment humor, and how that has the potential to mislead. Usually unintentionally, right? Like, we talked to like the Daily Show, for example. It's entertainment, but there is some news in there, right? So it's kind of understanding some of these things. And then with online satire, like The Onion or Reductress, sometimes things like that can get taken out of context, and without the context that like, oh, this is from The Onion, or, oh, this is from Reductress, it can actually become misinformation. So we think when it comes to entertainment, context is really important.
Yeah, that's very important because like you mentioned, with comedy and entertainment, it's all about entertaining. So I think that's something to definitely keep in mind while watching. But I was on the News Literacy Project's website, and I saw that they had a whole section just for educators. So I want to ask, do you feel like the public school system alone does enough to teach news literacy to kids? And also, how can parents teach their kids or implement some things that they will need to know at home?
Sure. Yeah. So what we offer, what the News Literacy Project offers for for educators is we have a virtual classroom called Checkology, which has about 18 lessons that focus on different facets of news literacy. Things like understand, like there's one lesson that's really cool. That's like, be the editor, so you understand how journalists are making decisions about what to cover, how news is made, things like that. But we also have things like our newest lessons are about being health informed, understanding data. So when you see statistics in news coverage, how can you understand what that actually means and some of the data that's behind that? How do you interpret data when we see it in the news? So Checkology offers all that stuff. And the cool thing about what we're doing is that Checkology has grown so much. The users are growing and growing. So I think that speaks to the hunger for news literacy education in schools around the country. We're also really excited to see that some states are requiring media literacy education in schools. And Illinois, where I live, is a state that just has put that law into place, that it's going to be required that students in public school learn media literacy skills when they're in school. So many S's.
Yes.
So we think that's really cool, and we're prepared to help teachers implement these media literacy skills in their classrooms. When it comes to parents, we also offer a lot of resources for everyone. So we have spent a lot of our time as an organization really focused on the educator side, building up curriculum, building up Checkology, this virtual classroom, and all the lessons that come with it. We have lots of resources for teachers, including infographics and posters and handouts and all kinds of stuff on our website. But we also are doing that for everyone, for adult learners, for just individual people. And that's a lot of the work that I do, is focused on kind of this work that's for everyone outside of classrooms. So I think parents, what they can do is learn a little news literacy themselves, right?
Yeah.
Where some of us are digital natives, some of us aren't. That's the world we're in right now. I feel like we're like half and half. Like some adults grew up with the internet, but a lot of adults still like were before smartphones. We remember a time before that. So there's a lot that we can learn, about technology. I'm a millennial, and I still feel like I'm doing some catching up. Like I am a digital native, but I'm still like, there's new things that come up and I'm just like, I don't know how to use that. I don't really understand TikTok, for example. Like I'm still learning how to use TikTok and learning about misinformation on that platform. I know that's a really big issue, but like, as a new user to TikTok, it's like, oh, I'm learning how they mark ads or sponsored content, or like how they regulate stuff that might come up on their platform, like misinformation. So it's all new. So we all need to learn a little bit of news literacy. And I think that's the best way that parents can help their kids, is to learn a little bit themselves and stay open-minded, because the kids have some things to teach them too.
Yeah. That's a really interesting concept, because it is kind of like half and half, and the media and the country just develop so fast. How can the older generation stay in the loop and stay and make sure that they're using news literacy?
Yeah, so we actually work with we've done some work with an organization called Older Adults Technology Services, and they offer a lot of really good resources to older adults to help with just exactly what you're talking about. And so we're really excited to continue a partnership with them and work with them on educating seniors. And so, like I said, our programs offer news literacy education to individual learners. And so I guess I'll just make a plug that at newslit.org, we have a ton of resources meant for adult learners. Checkology is available to adult learners. And we also offer webinars. Some that we have coming up are focused on the election. So we're going to talk about different information sources that will give you election information, kind of where to find reliable information about the election. We'll talk about how to spot mis and disinformation around the election, common things that we'll see around the election, common misinformation tropes. And then we're also going to talk about how to have productive conversations with people who may have been fooled by these falsehoods. So I think that one is really for people of all ages. I think that one is really interesting, because we all know somebody or have, encountered somebody kind of sharing this misinformation. So it's like, how do we talk to that person without making them feel bad or, starting a fight? Like, we just want these conversations to be productive, right? And to be civil. So that's one of our webinars is going to focus on that too.
Yeah, so I mean, clearly news literacy affects everyone. And you mentioned some very great ways that someone could, get involved with the News Literacy Project. So how could someone internationally get involved? Does News Literacy Project have any global programs?
So we do have Checkology users around the world, which is really cool. Anybody can access Checkology. Right now, all of our Checkology lessons are in English, but we are starting to build out more resources in Spanish. We're working with Factchequeado, which is a Spanish fact-checking site. They're helping us understand where the need might be as far as mis and disinformation that reaches Spanish-speaking populations. And around the election too, we talked to the managing editor of Factchequeado, and she gave us some information in Spanish that we were able to share about, how Spanish speakers are impacted by election misinformation. So that was really helpful. And we're starting to translate some of our resources into Spanish as well. So we're kind of just getting started on some of those efforts, but I think that people should expect to see a lot more from us in Spanish going forward. And it's something we're actively working on.
That's great. And is there any future projects or any exciting new things that the News Literacy Project is up to?
Yeah, so actually this week, we are recording this on October 7th, and just 2 days ago, we launched a brand new resource called Rumor Guard. So it's available at rumorguard.org. And basically what it is we're using fact checks of kind of viral rumors to teach news literacy. So when you go to Rumor Guard, you'll see posts that are debunking common or really viral rumors. Around Hurricane Ian, there was a lot of, we find around natural disasters that things from old content will kind of resurface and get shared as if it's from this current natural disaster. We see that a lot. And with Hurricane Ian, that's exactly what happened in a lot of cases. So on launch day, our main story was about some seal that was wandering the streets of Chile in 2020, but was being shared as if it was Florida during Ian. So it was, false context. It was an old thing that had resurfaced and was at one time accurate information, but is now misinformation in the context. So you'll see that. You'll see information about hey, this is why this is, not true, this claim. But then we also include resources to help people understand the news literacy skill behind that. So we have 5 factors that we use on Rumor Guard to fact check a claim. And then with those 5 factors, we also have techniques so that you can learn, how to understand. So one of the factors, for example, is source, understanding the source of the information. That's something I've talked about a lot in this conversation. But then you can dig a little bit deeper and learn about sourcing, and so next time you are surfing the internet or whatever, you're on social media, you see something, you'll know oh, I learned how to identify whether this is a credible source or not from this news literacy lesson. So that's what Rumor Guard is. It's so that's brand new, and we hope everybody will visit it. We also have an alert that we're going to be sending out. So if people want to join us, there is a way to sign up to get our alert that will give you some information about how to push back against misinformation that you may see in your feed. And it'll also highlight kind of our top posts from the week. So it's going to be a weekly alert going forward.
That sounds super great. I'm honestly personally excited. I would love to get involved myself. I have one last question for you. It's about conspiracy theory debunkers, specifically one about Snopes. How do you feel about those conspiracy theories debunkers, and are those reliable, and can people rely on those?
I mean, there's a lot of different platforms out there that do what you're talking about, do fact checks. And we definitely use a lot of them. When you go to Rumor Guard, you'll see that we actually reference other fact checks.
Mm-hmm.
So we, respect the work of fact checkers, absolutely. And are grateful for their service. And as far as are they reliable, what I would say is, come take a news literacy lesson on newslit.org and learn about identifying reliable sources and decide for yourself.
Thank you. Thank you so much for talking with me. Is there anything else that you would like to share before we leave?
Just a reminder that you can learn more about us at newslit.org.
Definitely. And where can we follow News Literacy on social media?
We are a Newslit project on pretty much every platform.
Cool. Well, thank you so much for talking with me. Thank you guys so much for listening, and I will see you next time.
Thank you.